Get her out of here now. The words struck like a slap across the room, sharp, deliberate, and dripping with entitlement. Heads turned. Smirks followed. In a single instant, her confidence, the smile she walked in with, the dignity she carried, was stripped away. Not because she had broken a rule, not because she had caused a scene, but simply because she existed in a space they believed was not meant for her. The laughter was cruel, the whispers venomous, and the silence from those who should have spoken up was deafening. They expected her to shrink, to bow her head, to walk out quietly and leave them victorious. But what they didn't know was that this woman wasn't just another target. She wasn't going to let their insult fade into another forgotten moment of injustice. She came prepared, and the decision they made that night, to humiliate her in front of everyone, wouldn't just cost them their pride. It would cost them $79 million, and the world would never look at them the same again. It was another bright morning in the city, and Aisha Thompson was already in motion. A rising star in the corporate world, she had built her career from scratch, long hours, relentless determination, and an unshakable sense of self. Her apartment overlooked the skyline, a modest luxury earned through years of hard work, and her days followed a rhythm she had mastered: early meetings, strategic decisions, and late-night plans for the next big project. Despite her success, Aisha remained grounded. She smiled at street vendors, remembered her neighbors' birthdays, and never missed a chance to mentor young women who reminded her of herself. People admired her, not just for her accomplishments, but for the quiet strength she carried in every step, every word, every glance. But on this particular evening, as she prepared for a private dinner at one of the city's most exclusive venues, a strange unease tugged at her. A whisper in the elevator, a glance from a passerby, little things that seemed insignificant yet somehow out of place. She brushed it off, attributing it to fatigue. After all, life had taught her to stay composed, to rise above discomfort, and to trust her instincts. What she didn't know was that this night in a room filled with wealth, privilege, and whispered judgments would test everything she believed about fairness, respect, and power. One casual insult aimed at nothing more than her presence would ignite a chain of events so shocking that it would ripple far beyond the walls of that elegant restaurant. And in that moment, the world she thought she controlled so carefully was about to reveal just how fragile appearances could be, and just how dangerous the assumptions of others could become. The evening had started normally enough. Aisha stepped out of her car, adjusting the strap of her designer bag as the doorman smiled politely. The restaurant's glass doors gleamed under the city lights, reflecting the buzz of luxury cars and well-dressed patrons. Everything about this night was supposed to be simple: a celebratory dinner for landing a major contract, an acknowledgement of her own relentless effort. But the moment she entered, the air shifted. A subtle silence fell as she crossed the marble floor, the murmurs of the room carrying the weight of judgment she hadn't expected. Heads turned, not in admiration, but with an unmistakable flicker of condescension. The maitre d' offered a polite nod, but there was an edge in his tone, a hesitation she couldn't ignore. It was the kind of moment that prickled the skin, a quiet signal that she did not belong in someone else's imagined world. Aisha smiled politely, holding her posture, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of discomfort. She found her table at the back, the one she had reserved weeks ago. But before she could sit, a voice sliced through the hum of conversation, a casual, almost careless remark thrown in her direction with the assumption that she would ignore it. "You're not usually here," the woman said, glancing at her with a smirk, lips curling as though her words were harmless humor. But they weren't harmless. They were sharp, aimed to remind Aisha of her difference, of the color of her skin in a room designed to be an exclusive playground for wealth and whiteness. Aisha's hand tightened around her menu. She had encountered prejudice before, of course, but never so brazen, so publicly, in a place she had every right to occupy. She measured her reaction, choosing calm over confrontation. Yet inside, her heart pounded. This was not just about insult. It was about power. about a subtle reminder that even her success was conditional, tolerated only at someone else's discretion. The night moved forward, but the tension escalated. The service was slow, inexplicably so, while others around her were attended to almost immediately. Requests that would normally have been acknowledged with a nod or a smile were met with impatience or outright dismissal. It was a quiet cruelty, a series of small humiliations that added up, each one a reminder that her presence was a disruption in their orderly, privileged world. As the main course arrived, the woman from earlier leaned over, her voice just loud, enough for the nearby table to hear. "Funny seeing someone like you here. I didn't know you belonged in, well, here." The words were meant to sting, to assert dominance. But Aisha's calm exterior masked the whirlwind of anger and disbelief. Inside, she ate slowly, every bite a deliberate act of composure, refusing to let them see the storm building within her. But it wasn't just the words, it was the glances, the whispers, the way servers skirted around her table, the subtle smirks shared by those who assumed their wealth and whiteness gave them authority to judge her. Each moment compounded, building a sense of isolation and tension that made the air feel heavier. The injustice was almost cinematic, everyone in the room participating without acknowledgement, reinforcing a hierarchy that had nothing to do with merit and everything to do with bias. Aisha's phone buzzed discreetly in her clutch, a friend checking in asking if she was okay. She typed back a brief reply, hiding her growing agitation. If she reacted openly, they would relish it. Their goal was to provoke humiliation, to assert superiority over someone who had never asked for their validation. And then came the tipping point. The woman approached her table carrying her glass of wine with exaggerated grace and leaned in, the words slipping out with careless cruelty. "You must be proud of yourself, but don't get too comfortable. People like us aren't used to seeing people like you succeed." Laughter tinkled behind her, but it was hollow, a weapon disguised as amusement. Aisha's pulse surged. Every instinct screamed to respond, to confront, to refuse submission. Yet she held back, weighing the moment, calculating how this encounter, so small, so fleeting, yet so poisonous, could be transformed into something larger. Something that would not just restore her dignity, but expose the arrogance and entitlement of those who assumed her presence could be dismissed. The woman smirked, assuming victory, turning on her heel to join her companions, leaving Aisha with a table that now felt charged with invisible hostility. The staff lingered awkwardly, unsure whether to serve or wait for permission from the rich patrons nearby. Every subtle slight, every glance, built into a crescendo of tension. It was as if the entire room conspired to remind her that she did not belong. And then, just when she thought she had weathered the worst, a manager approached, his expression polite but firm. "Excuse me, ma'am. There seems to be a problem with your reservation." His words were neutral, but the implication was clear. The reservation she had made, confirmed weeks in advance, was suddenly questioned, not because of error, but because of who she was. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Aisha realized in that moment that this was no accident. This was deliberate. She paused, considering her next move. A choice lay before her: accept the humiliation silently, as society often demanded, or respond in a way that would shake the foundations of this carefully constructed hierarchy. Her hands rested lightly. On the table, her breathing measured, every muscle coiled with restrained power. The silence stretched, heavy and electric, as the people around her sensed, subconsciously perhaps, that something was shifting. And in that pause, in the tension that hung thickly in the air, the story truly began. What started as a simple dinner had transformed into a battle of wills, a test of character and resilience. Aisha understood that this confrontation, small and personal as it seemed, could ripple far beyond the confines of the restaurant, touching the lives of everyone who witnessed it, or would hear of it later. Because in that moment she wasn't just a woman facing insult. She was a symbol of challenge, of resistance, of the power to turn humiliation into leverage. and she had no intention of letting them walk away thinking they had won. The restaurant felt smaller now, almost suffocating as Aisha rose from her chair. Her eyes scanned the room. Every whispered conversation, every sideways glance, every subtle smirk, it all crystallized into a single, undeniable truth. She was being tested, and the world around her assumed she would bend. The manager stepped, closer again, voice clipped but polite. "I'm afraid we cannot accommodate your table tonight," he said, the words carrying the weight of dismissal, of judgment cloaked in professionalism. Aisha's fingers tightened around her bag, knuckles whitening. She had navigated boardrooms with billion-dollar deals, handled investors who had doubted her every step. But this was different. This wasn't about money or business acumen. This was about her right to exist in a space that others had decided she didn't deserve. The woman who had sneered at her earlier leaned back, laughing softly, eyes glinting with the cruelty of entitlement. Her companions mirrored her amusement, their superiority unchallenged. The staff avoided her gaze, caught between duty and fear of the patrons who ruled this room with wealth as their shield. Every second stretched, taut as a wire, every heartbeat echoing like a drum in Aisha's chest. And then came the question that changed everything. "Do you realize who you're dealing with?" one of the patrons asked, voice dripping with condescension. It wasn't a question. It was a warning, a challenge, a reminder of the hierarchy they assumed they controlled. Aisha didn't flinch. She held their stares, her calm exterior masking the storm building inside. She could feel every eye in the room on her, weighing, judging, measuring whether she would crumble or retaliate. Her pulse thundered, but clarity emerged in the chaos. Humiliation was temporary. Justice, if seized, was permanent. She spoke softly, deliberately, every word calculated to cut through the pretension. "I'm aware exactly who I'm dealing with, and you're about to realize how wrong you are." The room went still, the words hanging in the air like a spark over dry kindling. She reached into her bag, not for a phone, not for a confrontation, but for the evidence she had quietly prepared for weeks. Contracts, emails, recordings, proof that the family and their associates had been knowingly discriminating, scheming, and manipulating in ways they thought invisible. Eyes widened. Gasps punctuated the silence. The woman who had laughed moments ago paled, her smug confidence cracking as realization dawned. The staff who had skirted around her now froze in disbelief. Aisha's calm authority filled the room, turning every glance of doubt back on those who had assumed she was powerless. "I've documented everything," Aisha continued, her voice firm, unwavering. "Every insult, every denial, every attempt to humiliate me. You treated me like I didn't belong here. You tried to erase me in front of everyone, but your mistakes are no longer secret." Panic spread subtly through the group, invisible to outsiders, but palpable to those who knew their power depended on others' silence. Phones appeared, calls were made, whispered conversations raced behind closed doors. The room, once a theater of entitlement, had become a courtroom, and Aisha, the quiet, composed force, had taken control of the narrative. The woman who had mocked her earlier took a step back, lips pressed tightly, eyes darting. The manager stammered, unsure whether to follow protocol or bow to the fury now emanating from the table. Every patron who had assumed superiority suddenly understood the cost of their arrogance, and then it happened. The family patriarch, alerted by a discreet message, appeared at the edge of the room. Tall, imposing, accustomed to deference, he looked down at Aisha, expecting apology, submission, maybe tears. Instead, he found someone entirely unshakable. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, voice cold, trying to reclaim dominance. But Aisha didn't flinch. She simply opened a folder, sliding it across the table. Inside were documents detailing financial misconduct, discriminatory practices, and deliberate humiliation, proof that could not be ignored, hidden, or denied. He snatched the folder, scanning the contents, face losing color as realization struck. In moments it became clear. The balance of power had shifted completely. The room that had once laughed at her now watched in stunned silence. The hum of entitlement replaced by the quiet crackle of disbelief. Aisha's calm eyes met his, unwavering. "This is just the beginning," she said softly, almost imperceptibly, but the weight of her words resonated through the air. "You assumed your wealth and status protected you from accountability. You were wrong." In that instant, the world tilted. Privilege, arrogance, and the illusion of control collided with truth, courage, and meticulous preparation. The patriarch closed the folder with a snap, rage and fear flickering across his face. Around them, whispers grew louder, staff and patrons, alike processing the reversal of roles. It was the moment Aisha had been waiting for, the moment when humiliation met justice, when arrogance met evidence, and when the world had to confront the consequences of dismissing someone because of their skin color. The energy in the room shifted palpably, the air heavy with disbelief and tension, as if the walls themselves recognized the magnitude of what had just occurred. And just as it seemed the confrontation had reached its peak, a final shock rippled. Through the room, a phone call from a major media outlet, tipped off by a silent ally who had witnessed the evening's events. In a few hours, the story would be public. The evidence, the humiliation, the arrogance, it would no longer be private, no longer confined to these walls. The patriarch froze, understanding immediately the scale of what had been unleashed. The room collectively held its breath, the weight of impending exposure pressing down on everyone present. Aisha remained poised, serene, every inch the embodiment of controlled power. In that moment, the world shifted, not just for those in the room, but for anyone who would hear of this night. Humiliation had turned into reckoning. Prejudice had collided with resolve. Power had been challenged, and the result was explosive. Aisha leaned back, allowing a single, satisfied breath to escape. She had faced the worst of the injustice, public, personal, and deliberate, and had turned it into an unassailable victory. But the story was far from over. The consequences, both immediate and far-reaching, were about to unfold. And as the first phone call started buzzing, as whispers turned into frantic discussions, one question lingered in the charged silence. Who would survive this reckoning? And who would pay the ultimate price? The aftermath was swift and unrelenting. By morning, the story had spread far beyond the walls of the elegant restaurant. News outlets picked it up, social media ignited with outrage, and the narrative was clear. A black woman, insulted and humiliated, in a room full of privilege, had turned the tables in a way no one could ignore. The family that had assumed untouchable status faced scrutiny they had never anticipated. Their wealth and connections, once shields of untouchable power, could not protect them from accountability. Aisha woke the next day with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The events of the evening replayed in her mind like a vivid film. The smirks, the dismissive comments, the tension so thick it had almost been tangible, and finally the moment of confrontation, when her calm authority had exposed the injustice for all to see. Every detail, every slight, every pang of fear she had endured had led to this moment of undeniable truth. The ripple effects were immediate. Contracts were canceled, public statements were demanded, and internal investigations began within the family's business empire. Those who had once treated her with condescension now approached with tentative respect, their eyes betraying a new awareness. Aisha Thompson was not someone to underestimate. The power dynamics had shifted, and for the first time those who had assumed dominance experienced the discomfort of vulnerability. But the personal impact on Aisha was far deeper than public recognition or financial vindication. She had confronted a painful reality, the subtle and overt ways racial prejudice continues to operate in spaces supposedly defined by merit or wealth. She had felt the sting of humiliation, the isolation of being singled out, and the tension of navigating a world where appearances and assumptions often outweigh fairness. And yet, through it all, she discovered something profound: resilience, clarity, and the power of controlled, deliberate action. Friends and colleagues reached out, sharing messages of support and solidarity. Some spoke of similar experiences they had endured silently for years. Others admitted they had never considered the insidious ways discrimination could operate in high-powered spaces. Aisha's experience became a mirror for society, reflecting not just individual cruelty, but the systemic structures that allow bias to fester unchecked. She used her platform wisely. Public statements, carefully crafted interviews, and private mentoring sessions became her way of transforming a moment of personal injustice into a broader conversation about equality, dignity, and accountability. The incident was no longer just her story. It had become a symbol, a testament to the idea that courage and preparation can challenge even the most entrenched systems of power. Yet Aisha never allowed the incident to define her entirely. She returned to her life, to her work, to her ambitions, but with a heightened sense of awareness and purpose. The experience had fortified her, sharpened her instincts, and illuminated the subtle injustices that many endure daily without recognition or recourse. She understood more deeply than ever that privilege often disguises itself as normalcy, and that challenging it requires not just courage, but strategy, patience, and resilience. In the weeks and months that followed, the family faced legal consequences, public backlash, and a permanent tarnish on their reputation, but more importantly, they had been forced to confront the human cost of their arrogance, the damage inflicted by assumptions of superiority, and the consequences of treating someone as less than human. For Aisha, the victory was not just measured in headlines or financial leverage. It was measured in dignity restored, injustice confronted, and a narrative reclaimed. The broader impact resonated far beyond that evening. Conversations about systemic racism, microaggressions, and the subtle ways power operates in social and professional spheres were sparked in living rooms, boardrooms, and online communities. People began to question, how often do we allow prejudice to pass unchallenged? How frequently do we assume someone doesn't belong simply because they look different or come from a background we deem other? Aisha's story illuminated the answer, too often and with consequences both personal and societal. For viewers watching now, there is a lesson as urgent as it is personal. Injustice is not always visible in headlines, but it exists everywhere, waiting to be confronted, documented, and challenged. And confronting it does not require recklessness but strategy, courage, and the refusal to allow humiliation to define you. Aisha's response was deliberate, controlled, and powerful. It demonstrated that even in the face of systemic bias, individuals can reclaim agency and turn personal trials into societal reflection. In the quiet moments after the storm, Aisha reflected on the evening and all that had followed. She thought of the fear she had felt, the anger that had simmered beneath the surface, and the satisfaction of witnessing accountability take root. But most of all, she considered the countless others who did not have her platform, her resources, or the chance to confront injustice so publicly. Her story was extraordinary, yes, but it was also a reminder. Injustice can be challenged anywhere, by anyone, if courage meets preparation. And as she gazed out over the city skyline once more, Aisha understood the enduring truth. Privilege and wealth may create illusions of power, but integrity, strategy, and resilience can dismantle those illusions in ways that echo far beyond a single night. Her victory was a beacon, a signal that change is possible, that justice can be claimed, and that one person's courage can ripple outward, affecting not just the perpetrators of bias, but society itself. The final thought lingered, heavy and purposeful. How many more times will the world allow prejudice and entitlement to define the rules before someone dares to challenge it? And when that someone rises, will we recognize them? Or continue to turn away, waiting for injustice to strike again? Aisha's story was not just her story, it was a call to attention, a reminder, and a challenge, to confront bias, to reclaim dignity, and to act, even when the odds seem stacked. Because in every space, in every boardroom, in every restaurant, there is the chance to turn fear and humiliation into empowerment. there is the chance to remind the world, respect is not optional, justice is not negotiable, and no one, no matter how powerful, can silence the truth forever.